Footsteps echoed in the sealed corridor. 3 heavily armed mercenaries cornered the royal heir, laughing at her desperate retreat. They thought her species was weak. They thought her human attendant was just a fragile diplomat. They were completely, fatally wrong about the apex predator standing quietly in the shadows. Heavy crystal glasses clinked under the ambient glow of the chandeliers aboard the Olympus orbital station. To the untrained eye, the Solstice Gala was a triumph of galactic diplomacy, a glittering assembly of the sector's wealthiest aristocrats and political titans. To Connor Hayes, it was a target-rich environment entirely devoid of cover. Connor adjusted the stiff collar of his formal diplomatic tunic, letting out a small, measured sigh. He slumped his shoulders slightly, keeping his chin tucked in a posture of submissive deference. Beside him stood Princess Beatrice of the Sovereign Coalition, radiating a natural luminescence that made her look more like a living marble statue than flesh and blood. She was tall, impossibly elegant, and currently engaged in a tedious conversation with a planetary governor. "My dear princess," the governor sneered slightly, his gaze flicking down to Connor, "I am still baffled by your father's decision to employ him in your retinue. Are they not delicate?" Beatrice offered a polite practice smile. "Connor is my cultural attaché, governor. Humanity has provided fascinating insights into agricultural reform. And while they may not possess our natural resilience, their diplomatic literature is quite profound." Connor gave a meek, awkward bow, intentionally misjudging the 1G artificial gravity of the station and stumbling slightly. The governor chuckled, a wet rattling sound in his throat, while Beatrice placed a gentle, steadying hand on Connor's arm. "Careful, Connor," she murmured softly. "The gravity calibrators are set slightly higher tonight." "My apologies, Your Highness," Connor stammered, pitching his voice to sound slightly breathless and intimidated. "I'll try to find my footing." It was all a meticulously crafted lie. Connor's heart was beating at a steady resting rhythm of 50 beats per minute. His footing wasn't slipping because of the gravity. 11G was practically a holiday for a man born and raised in the heavy, unforgiving pull of Earth. Before the United Nations established the Terran Diplomatic Corps, Connor had spent 10 years in the shadows, first as an assaulter in the U.S. Army 75th Ranger Regiment and later as a Tier 1 operator running black jobs in the Middle East for Aegis Defense Services and Constellas. When Earth was invited to the Galactic table, the UN realized they were the underdogs in a universe of highly advanced, heavily shielded alien empires. Humanity couldn't compete with plasma cannons or deflector shields. Not yet. But Earth had one export that no other species in the galaxy could match: professional, calculated, industrialized violence. The aliens of the Coalition had evolved in utopian, low-competition biospheres. They fought wars with drones, ship-to-ship artillery, and gentlemen's agreements. They had no concept of close-quarters combat. They had no idea what a human being was capable of when pushed to the absolute brink. To keep humanity off the radar of hostile empires, Terran actively played the part of the frail intellectual newcomers. Connor was officially a glorified secretary. Unofficially, he was a lethal insurance policy provided by a classified UN security initiative, handpicked to protect Beatrice because her father, King William, was Earth's only political ally in the sector. Connor's eyes continuously scanned the ballroom, operating on the OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, act. He noted the structural weak points of the room. He tracked the patrol routes of Beatrice's elite royal guard, towering beings wrapped in ceremonial kinetic armor. They looked intimidating, but Connor noted how their weight distribution was entirely wrong. They carried their plasma rifles loosely, relying on their technology rather than situational awareness. "I'm going to get a drink, Your Highness," Connor whispered, feigning exhaustion. "Of course. Rest by the pillar, Connor," Beatrice replied sympathetically. Connor shuffled away, leaning against a marble column. He tapped the hidden comm unit behind his ear, disguised as a hearing aid. "Overwatch, this is Hayes," he murmured, barely moving his lips. A voice crackled back from a disguised freighter hovering 20,000 m away. "Solid copy, Hayes. This is baseplate. Station telemetry looks quiet." We're tracking the VIP. How's the masquerade? Boring, Connor muttered. But I don't like the security detail. The coalition guards are too relaxed. Someone bypassed the secondary biometric scanners at the east airlock 20 minutes ago. Maintenance crew supposedly, but they're moving in a stack formation. Hold one. Checking. We show authorized maintenance. Maintenance crews don't move in a tactical wedge, Connor said, his voice dropping its meek facade, replaced by cold, absolute certainty. And they're carrying heavy equipment boxes. I'm calling it. We have a breach. Hayes, you do not have authorization to break cover. I repeat, do not break cover unless the VIP is in critical jeopardy. Understood, Connor said. He looked back at Beatrice. The grand orchestral music swelled, filling the massive atrium. Then, with a sound like a cracking whip, the lights went dead. The sudden darkness was accompanied by a high-pitched, agonizing squeal. It was an EMP burst, specifically calibrated to fry the energy shields and dampening fields that the wealthy aristocrats relied upon for protection. Panic erupted instantly. Screams echoed through the grand ballroom as the music abruptly died, replaced by the heavy, thudding sound of magnetic boots slamming against the deck plates. Connor didn't scream. While the aliens around him clutched their sensitive ears and flailed in the pitch-black darkness, Connor immediately closed his eyes to preserve his natural night vision and dropped into a low crouch. His hand reached down to his ankle, his fingers wrapping around the textured grip of a custom non-metallic ceramic blade designed by Lockheed Martin's Advanced Materials Division. It was invisible to the station's weapon scanners, yet sharp enough to cleave through bone. Flashes of brilliant blue plasma fire lit up the room. The breach team had arrived. Target acquired. Eliminate the Royal Guard. A deep, synthesized voice commanded over the chaos. Connor opened his eyes. The ambient starlight from the massive glass observation windows provided just enough illumination. He watched as 6 heavily armed mercenaries clad in matte black kinetic armor moved through the crowd with brutal efficiency. They weren't using the elegant, slow-moving precision of coalition warfare. This was an assassination squad. The Royal Guards, towering and imposing, hesitated. Their energy shields were down, and they had never trained for a complete technological failure. Before they could even raise their rifles, the mercenaries cut them down in a hail of automatic plasma fire. The guards fell, their ceremonial armor useless against the concentrated thermokinetic impacts. Connor's eyes locked onto Beatrice. She was standing frozen in the center of the room, illuminated by the dying sparks of a shattered chandelier. A mercenary leveled his weapon at her. Cover is blown, Connor thought. He moved. He didn't run like a frightened animal. He moved with the explosive, controlled violence of a sprinter leaving the blocks. He tackled Beatrice just as a plasma bolt scorched the air where her chest had been a fraction of a second prior. The heat of the blast singed the back of Connor's uniform, but he ignored it. Connor! Beatrice shrieked in terror as they hit the marble floor hard. Keep your head down, Your Highness? Connor screamed, intentionally raising the pitch of his voice to sound hysterical. He needed the assassins to think he was just a panicked civilian acting on blind luck. He grabbed her arm and practically dragged her toward the Eastern Service corridors. Run! We have to run! The guards! She cried, looking back at the slaughter. They're dead. Move! Connor dragged her through a set of heavy blast doors just as they began to automatically seal in response to the emergency protocols. Behind them, the leader of the mercenaries, a scarred, imposing alien known in the underworld as Vincent, pointed toward the closing doors. Arthur, Caleb, the princess is in the service sector. Flush her out. The Terran is with her. Ignore him. He's harmless. Just secure the royal. Connor pulled Beatrice through a labyrinth of narrow metallic maintenance hallways. The air here smelled of ozone, grease, and coolant. The gravity was slightly heavier here, closer to the station's core, and Beatrice was struggling to keep up. Her species was built for grace and longevity, not endurance running. She collapsed against a bulkhead, gasping for breath, her glowing skin pale with shock. I can't, she panted, holding her chest. My legs, they're burning. Connor looked at her. Her heart rate was dangerously high. Her biology couldn't handle the anaerobic strain. Connor, however, wasn't even breathing heavily. His human cardiovascular system, evolved to chase down prey across the burning savannas of Earth, was just getting warmed up. "We can't stop here, Beatrice," Connor said, dropping the formal title. His voice was suddenly steady, a deep, resonant baritone that starkly contrasted with his earlier meekness. She looked up at him, confused by the sudden change in his demeanor. Before she could ask, the heavy metallic clang of boots echoed from the hallway behind them. "They're coming," Connor said. He quickly analyzed the environment. Narrow corridor, no branching paths for the next 50 m, dead end ahead at the pressure bulkhead. It was a fatal choke point. He had intentionally led them here. "Connor, what have you done?" Beatrice whispered, her eyes widening in despair as she realized they were trapped. "This is a sealed bulkhead. We're cornered." "I know," Connor said, stepping in front of her. 3 figures rounded the corner. Vincent, Arthur, and Caleb. Their heavy armor clattered as they raised their weapons. The narrow hallway meant they had to stand shoulder to shoulder, severely limiting their field of fire. Vincent let out a booming, cruel laugh. Well, Princess Beatrice, running into a dead end. How tragically poetic. Your father's reign ends tonight, and the Terran Alliance dies with you." Beatrice pressed herself against the cold steel door, trembling. "Please," she begged. "Whatever my political rivals are paying you, I can double it." "It's not about money, Princess," Vincent snarled, stepping forward. He glanced at Connor, who was hunched over, his hands trembling violently. "Get out of the way, ape, or I'll melt you down to the bone before I kill her." Connor kept his head bowed, his hand shaking. "Please don't hurt her. I'm just a diplomat. I don't know anything." Vincent scoffed, lowering his rifle slightly, disgusted by the display of cowardice. "Pathetic. Terran, you shatter at the first sign of real danger. Arthur, kill the pet. I'll take the princess." Arthur stepped forward casually, raising a sidearm to point at Connor's head. He didn't bother aiming down the sights. He didn't think he needed to. It was the last mistake he would ever make. Connor's trembling wasn't out of fear. It was a physiological response to a massive, deliberate dump of epinephrine into his bloodstream. His central nervous system was flooding with adrenaline, narrowing his vision, hyperoxygenating his muscles, and preparing his body for absolute, unrestrained violence. The moment Arthur's finger twitched toward the trigger, Connor moved. He didn't dodge. Human reaction time to a visual stimulus, combined with the explosive fast-twitch muscle fibers of a trained operator, operated on a physical scale the aliens simply didn't possess. In a fraction of a second, Connor's right hand shot out, swatting the barrel of the plasma pistol aside just as it fired. The bolt scorched the bulkhead behind him. Before Arthur could process the movement, Connor stepped inside his guard. He drove his left palm upward in a brutal, bone-shattering strike directly into the underside of Arthur's jaw. The sickening crack echoed through the corridor. The alien's anatomy, evolved for low-gravity elegance, featured a skeletal structure similar to avian bones, lightweight and relatively fragile. The kinetic force of Connor's strike snapped Arthur's jaw and drove the bone fragments directly into his cranial cavity. The mercenary was dead before his body hit the floor. Vincent and Caleb froze. Their brains, unaccustomed to such blinding speed and primal savagery, suffered a momentary cognitive lag. That was all Connor needed. Without missing a beat, Connor grabbed the falling plasma pistol from Arthur's limp hand. He didn't fire it. Instead, he used it as a blunt instrument. He spun, driving the heavy metal grip of the pistol directly into Caleb's throat. The armor there was thin, designed to allow neck mobility. Caleb gagged, dropping his rifle as his trachea was crushed. Connor fluidly drew the ceramic blade from his ankle holster. He drove the black blade up under Caleb's armpit, bypassing the heavy chest plates, sinking it deep into the alien's secondary pulmonary valve. He twisted the blade and ripped it out in one smooth, practiced motion, spraying dark violet blood across the sterile white walls of the corridor. Caleb collapsed, gurgling. 2 down in less than 3 seconds. Vincent finally reacted, letting out a roar of fury and terror. He leveled his heavy rifle, but Connor was already moving. Connor grabbed Caleb's collapsing body by the tactical harness and hoisted the heavy alien up, using him as a meat shield. Vincent opened fire. Searing bolts of plasma tore into Caleb's corpse, burning through armor and flesh. The heat was blinding, and the kinetic impact pushed Connor backward, but his boots dug into the floor. He gritted his teeth, his human pain tolerance absorbing the scorching ambient heat that would have sent any other species into neurogenic shock. Peeking over Caleb's shoulder, Connor locked his eyes on Vincent. He shifted his grip on the stolen plasma pistol, bringing it up in a tight center-axis relock stance, a Terran close-quarters combat technique designed for weapon retention and rapid target acquisition. Bang, bang, bang. Connor pulled the trigger 3 times in rapid succession. The first bolt shattered Vincent's shoulder plate. The second melted his primary weapon. The third struck him dead center in the knee joint. Vincent screamed, a horrible tearing sound, and crashed to the floor. The heavy rifle clattered away. The corridor fell dead silent, save for the hum of the station's life support and Vincent's ragged, agonizing groans. Connor dropped Caleb's smoking corpse. He stood up straight. The submissive slouch was entirely gone. He rolled his shoulders, his muscles rippling tightly beneath his ruined diplomatic tunic. He wiped a streak of violet blood from his cheek, his face a motionless mask of cold, calculating lethality. Princess Beatrice was pressed against the bulkhead, her hands covering her mouth, her eyes wide with a terror that defied description. She wasn't looking at the dead mercenaries. She was looking at Connor, the man who had stumbled over the gravity settings, the man who had stuttered and bowed. He had just butchered a squad of elite military assassins with his bare hands and a piece of sharpened ceramic. "Connor," Beatrice whispered, her voice trembling so hard it was barely audible. What are you?" Connor didn't look at her yet. He walked slowly toward Vincent. The mercenary commander was dragging himself backward, leaving a trail of blood. His eyes locked on the human with pure, unadulterated horror. "You!" Vincent choked out, coughing up fluid. "You're a Terran. You're supposed to be weak. You're supposed to be prey." Connor stopped standing over him. He looked down, his eyes devoid of mercy. "We let you think that," Connor said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. "Because the alternative terrifies the diplomatic committees." Connor raised his boot and stomped down on Vincent's unbroken arm, pinning it to the deck. Vincent shrieked. "Who hired you?" Connor demanded, applying more pressure. "You're not a street gang. You're wearing mil-spec armor, and you used a military-grade EMP. Talk, or I'll start breaking things you need to live." "Go to hell, ape," Vincent spat. Connor didn't hesitate. He shifted his weight, snapping Vincent's ulna with a sickening crunch. Vincent howled, thrashing wildly. "I don't have time for this," Connor said coldly. He pressed the barrel of the plasma pistol against Vincent's remaining knee. "Name the Viceroy." "Viceroy Malakar," Vincent screamed, sobbing in agony. "He wants the coalition fractured. He wants the Terran treaty burned. Please, that's all I know." Connor nodded slowly. "Thank you." He squeezed the trigger, ending the mercenary's suffering with a single bolt to the chest. Connor holstered the pistol at his waist, grabbed a heavier plasma rifle from the floor, and expertly checked the power cell, slapping it back into the receiver with a sharp clack. He turned back to Beatrice. She flinched as he approached, pressing herself further into the corner. "Princess," Connor said, his voice softening just a fraction, reverting to a protective, steady tone. "Are you injured? Stay away from me," she whimpered, tears streaming down her glowing face. "You're a monster. You tore them apart like it was nothing." Connor stopped. He took a deep breath, letting the adrenaline begin its slow, controlled burn out of his system. Back on Earth, Dr. Richard Henderson, the UN's chief psychological evaluator, had warned him about this moment. When the mask comes off, Hayes, they won't see you as a savior. They'll see you as a demon. Our evolutionary history is a nightmare to them. I am a soldier, Your Highness, Connor said firmly, looking her directly in the eyes. My name is Master Sergeant Connor Hayes, United Nations Special Operations Command. I was assigned to protect you because your father knew Malakar was planning a coup. We hid my true purpose because your Senate would never have allowed a Terran military operator within 10 miles of you. Beatrice stared at him, trying to process the revelation. Earth, humanity, you are all like this? The ones they send into the dark are, Connor replied. He reached up and tapped his hidden earpiece. Base plate, this is Hayes. Blindfold is off. I repeat, blindfold is off. We have 3 Tango Kia in the Eastern Maintenance Sector. The hit was ordered by Viceroy Malakar. The station is compromised. Static hissed in his ear before the grim voice of his handler returned. Copy that, Hayes. We are registering multiple breach pods attaching to the station's hull. Malakar isn't leaving this to a single squad. He's sending a battalion to wipe out the gala and ensure there are no witnesses. Connor gritted his teeth. What's our extraction timeline? I have a stealth dropship spooling its drives, but the orbital defense grid is still active. You need to get to the main security terminal in Sector 4 and disable the anti-air cannons, or we can't get you out. You have exactly 20 minutes before Malakar's kill squads sweep the entire station. Understood, Connor said. He cut the feed. He looked down at the rifle in his hands, checking the safety, feeling the familiar, cold comfort of a weapon ready for war. He walked over to Beatrice and offered his hand. She looked at it as if it were a venomous serpent. Beatrice, Connor said, dropping the titles entirely. In about 5 minutes, this entire station is going to be flooded with heavily armed soldiers who want to put your head on a spike. If you stay here, you die. If you run by yourself, you die. He stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. But if you come with me, I promise you, I will burn this entire station to the ground before I let them touch you. Now get up. Slowly, trembling, the alien princess reached out and took the human's hand. His grip was warm, rough, and terrifyingly strong. He pulled her to her feet effortlessly. Connor Hayes racked the charging handle of the plasma rifle. The masquerade was over. It was time to go to work. The orbital station's primary corridors had transformed from a theater of diplomatic elegance into a flashing, strobe-lit nightmare. Red emergency luminal panels bathed the metallic bulkheads in a bloody hue, and the automated klaxons wailed a continuous, rhythmic warning that set the alien aristocrats into paralytic panic. Master Sergeant Connor Hayes ignored the sirens. His mind was compartmentalized, filtering out the sensory overload and reducing the environment to geometries of cover, concealment, and lines of fire. Behind him, Princess Beatrice kept her hand firmly gripped on the tactical webbing of his precision low-profile vest, her breathing ragged. Control your breathing, Beatrice, Connor instructed, his voice an eerie flat calm amidst the blaring alarms. Inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4. This is called box breathing. It will stop your heart from racing out of your chest. How can you be so calm? She choked out, forcing herself to follow his count. There is a battalion of Malakar's butchers on this station. They are hunting us. They are hunting a diplomat and a princess. Connor corrected, pausing at an intersection to slice the pie, clearing the corner degree by degree with the barrel of his stolen plasma rifle. They don't know they're walking into a fatal funnel. Moving. He led her down a maintenance artery leading to Sector 4. The artificial gravity here was heavier, grinding against Beatrice's joints, but Connor moved with a fluid, terrifying grace. To Beatrice, whose people had long ago outsourced violence to automated drones and ceremonial champions, the Terran was a biological impossibility. He didn't have heavy armor. He didn't have a personal deflector shield. He had nothing but a canvas vest, a stolen rifle, and a mind forged in the crucible of Earth's endless wars. Connor suddenly halted, his hand shooting up in a closed fist. Beatrice stopped dead. Patrol, Connor whispered, pressing his back against the bulkhead. 10 meters up, 2 points of entry. They're trying to flank the corridor. Beatrice listened, finally hearing the heavy metallic thud of kinetic boots. There are at least 8 of them, Connor. We can't fight 8 heavily armored shock troops. We don't have to fight them fair, Connor muttered. He slung his rifle and dropped to one knee, pulling 3 spare plasma power cells from the webbing of the dead mercenary he had looted earlier. To the aliens, these were strictly ammunition. To a soldier trained by the likes of Sergeant Major Thomas Paine, a legend of the Terran Special Operations community, a plasma cell was just raw thermal energy waiting to be liberated. Connor drew his Lockheed Martin ceramic blade and expertly pried the magnetic containment caps off 2 of the cells. He jammed them together, wrapping them tightly with a strip of medical tape from his blowout kit, and wedged the makeshift device behind a pressurized coolant pipe running along the floor. "What is that?" Beatrice whispered. "Improvised explosive device," Connor said, grabbing her arm and pulling her 20M back down the hall behind a heavy structural pillar. "Welcome to human ingenuity." He raised his rifle and aimed precisely at the exposed, volatile core of the rigged plasma cells. The heavy footsteps grew louder. The shock troops rounded the corner in a tight, undisciplined cluster, their weapons raised. "Target sighted," the lead trooper barked, seeing Connor's shoulder exposed from behind the pillar. Connor didn't flinch. He adjusted his aim down the hallway and pulled the trigger. The plasma bolt struck the rigged cells. The magnetic containment completely failed, resulting in a catastrophic thermal runaway. The explosion was blindingly white, a miniature sun detonating in the confined space of the corridor. The blast wave ruptured the overhead coolant pipes, sending a super-chilled cloud of liquid nitrogen expanding rapidly into the superheated air, creating a massive concussive steam explosion. The shock waved through the alien shock troops like ragdolls. Their kinetic armor, designed to stop directed energy weapons, was completely useless against the massive overpressure and kinetic force of a localized blast. Shrapnel from the coolant pipe tore through the hallway, shredding the patrol before they even understood what had hit them. The deafening roar faded into the hiss of escaping steam and the groans of dying mercenaries. Connor stepped out from behind the pillar, his rifle raised, and advanced into the thick white vapor. He moved with cold, mechanical efficiency. 2 sharp cracks of his rifle sounded through the steam as he double-tapped the surviving, writhing troops, ensuring the threat was neutralized. Beatrice stepped out tentatively, stepping over the scorched, mangled remains of Malakir's elite soldiers. She looked at Connor, her glowing eyes wide, with a profound, terrifying realization. "You turned a battery into a bomb," she said. Her voice was hollow. "You weaponized the environment." "Rule 1 of asymmetric warfare, Your Highness," Connor said, checking his corners and gesturing for her to follow. "If you find yourself in a fair fight, your tactics suck." They reached the heavy blast doors of the Sector 4 security terminal. The doors were magnetically sealed, glowing with a dull, impenetrable hum. "I need to slice the access panel to get us inside so I can shut down the anti-air cannons," Connor said, pulling a specialized Terran decryption spike from his belt. "It'll take me 2 minutes. I can do it in 2 seconds, Beatrice said, her voice suddenly finding a core of steel. She stepped forward, wiping a smudge of soot from her cheek. She pressed her palm against the biometric scanner and spoke in a clear, commanding tone. "Override authorization. Sovereign Alpha 1. Recognize Beatrice, crown heir of the coalition." The system chimed happily, and the heavy doors slid apart with a pneumatic hiss. Connor raised an eyebrow. "Nice work, Princess. I am not just a porcelain doll to be carried, Master Sergeant," she replied, her chin held high despite the terror in her eyes. "Let's finish this." They stepped into the terminal. It was a massive circular room dominated by glowing holographic tactical tables. 2 automated sentry turrets dropped from the ceiling, their targeting lasers sweeping the room. Connor didn't hesitate. He sprinted laterally, sliding across the polished floor as the turrets opened fire, scorching the deck plates behind him. He unholstered his sidearm, a Terran SIG Sauer P320 chambered in heavy 9mm depleted uranium rounds, completely illegal under coalition treaties, and fired 4 consecutive shots. The dense kinetic rounds shattered the glass sensors of the turrets, blinding them instantly. He vaulted over a control console, driving his ceramic blade into the primary junction box of the automated defense system, shorting it out entirely. "Clear," Connor barked, breathing heavily. "Get on the terminal, Beatrice. I need those anti-air cannons powered down now." Beatrice practically threw herself at the primary holographic interface. Her long, elegant fingers flew across the light keys, her mind processing the complex command codes of her people's military infrastructure. "The AA network is heavily encrypted," she stated, her voice tight with concentration. Malakar slicers locked the central mainframe. "Break it," Connor demanded, watching the door. "We have company coming. A lot of it." His earpiece crackled to life. "Hayes, this is baseplate. The dropship is out of the dark. Flight Officer Jessica Riley is burning hard for Hangar Bay 7. But we have a problem. Malakar just deployed his personal vanguard. They're in heavy exo armor, and they are converging on your position." "ETA on the dropship?" Connor asked, dropping the empty magazine from his rifle and slapping a fresh one home. 3 minutes. Can you hold?" "We'll hold," Connor said grimly. He looked at the door. "Beatrice, how much longer?" "Almost. Got it." The holographic display flashed from crimson red to a cool operational blue. "The orbital defense cannons are offline. The hangar bay force fields are down. Move to the hangar." They bolted from the security terminal, sprinting down the grand promenade that led to Hangar Bay 7. The massive observation windows offered a terrifying view of the cosmos. Dozens of Malakar's dreadnoughts were swarming the station, their plasma batteries systematically destroying the Loyalist coalition ships. They burst through the final set of blast doors into Hangar Bay 7. The cavernous room was cold, smelling of aviation fuel and burnt ozone. At the far end, descending through the atmospheric retention shield, was the Terran dropship. It was a beautiful, terrifying wedge of General Dynamics radar-absorbent stealth plating. Completely devoid of the elegant curves favored by alien shipwrights, it looked like a flying spearhead. Its rear ramp was already lowering, and the familiar, comforting roar of twin human-engineered fusion thrusters shook the deck. "There!" Connor shouted, pointing toward the ramp. "Run, Beatrice. Do not stop until you are inside." A massive explosion shattered the bulkhead to their left. Through the smoke and twisted metal stepped 3 of Malakar's vanguard. They were horrifying, standing 8 feet tall, encased in overlapping plates of heavy ablative armor, wielding twin-linked heavy plasma repeaters. They looked like walking tanks. The lead vanguard locked its visor onto the princess. "Target acquired. Execute. Run!" Connor roared, shoving Beatrice violently toward the dropship. Connor didn't run. He turned to face the walking tanks, planting his feet wide. He brought his rifle up and held down the trigger, pouring continuous, blinding fire into the lead vanguard's chest plate. The plasma bolts splashed harmlessly against the heavy armor, but the sheer kinetic impact forced the giant to stagger backward. "Flee!" the second vanguard boomed, swiveling its heavy repeater toward the human. A stream of superheated plasma tore across the hangar deck. Connor dove behind a stack of heavy cargo containers, but he wasn't quite fast enough. A bolt grazed the side of his right thigh. The pain was absolute. It felt as if a branding iron had been driven into his muscle and left there. The heat instantly cauterized the wound, burning through his trousers and charring the flesh down to the fascia. Connor hit the deck hard, a primal grunt of agony escaping his lips. To the vanguard, the fight was over. Alien physiology could not handle trauma of that magnitude. Their nervous systems would trigger immediate paralyzing neurogenic shock to protect the brain. The vanguard slowly advanced, assuming the Terran was incapacitated. They didn't understand human endocrinology. In Connor's brain, the amygdala screamed in terror, but his trained cerebral cortex clamped down on it. His adrenal glands flushed a massive toxic cocktail of epinephrine and cortisol directly into his heart. The pain didn't paralyze him. It infuriated him. Connor rolled onto his back, his face pale, sweat pouring down his forehead. He drew his SIG sour sidearm and pulled a heavy metallic cylinder from his tactical belt, a high-explosive anti-armor grenade, standard issue for UN heavy infantry. He pulled the pin with his teeth. "Hey, ugly!" Connor roared over the din of the thrusters. The lead vanguard looked down over the cargo container. Connor threw the grenade with the precision of a major league pitcher. It didn't bounce. It struck the vanguard squarely in the center of its chest plate and magnetically adhered to the armor. The alien looked down at the blinking green light. A mechanical voice in its helmet suddenly screamed a warning. Connor covered his head. The explosion tore the hangar bay apart. The specialized shaped charge directed a jet of molten copper straight through the Vanguard's ablative plating, violently detonating the alien's own internal power supply. The giant was blown into a shower of twisted shrapnel and blue fire, the blast wave knocking the other two heavily armored warriors off their feet. Connor forced himself up. His legs screamed in agony, refusing to bear weight, but he dragged himself forward, leaning heavily on the cargo crates, keeping his sidearm trained on the smoke. "Connor!" He looked back. Beatrice was standing on the ramp of the dropship, her hand outstretched, her eyes frantic. Flight Officer Riley was screaming over the ship's external PA system. "Get your ass on board, Hayes. We are burning hot." Connor limped toward the ramp, every step a monumental battle of will against biology. The two surviving Vanguard were beginning to stand, their visors locking onto the limping human. They raised their weapons. Suddenly, the nose of the Terran dropship dipped. The chin-mounted rotary cannons, 30 millimeters depleted uranium armor-piercing rounds, spun up with a deafening, terrifying burr. The two Vanguard were simply erased. The sheer volume of kinetic fire tore through their heavy armor like wet paper, turning them into a fine, bloody mist against the bulkhead. Connor collapsed onto the ramp as it began to raise. Beatrice fell to her knees beside him, grabbing his tactical vest and hauling him the rest of the way into the sterile, dimly lit cargo bay of the dropship. The heavy ramp slammed shut, sealing them in. The G-force immediately slammed them into the deck as Riley punched the fusion drives, launching the stealth ship out of the hangar bay and into the cold void of space, rocketing past Malakir's dreadnoughts before their senses could even register the radar-absorbent hull. In the cargo bay, Beatrice stared at the human lying bleeding on the grated floor. Connor was pale, panting heavily, his hands shaking as the adrenaline finally began to ebb, leaving only the searing agony of his burned leg. He unclipped his helmet, leaning his head back against the bulkhead, and let out a long, exhausted sigh. He looked at the princess and offered a weak, pain-tightened smile. "Diplomatic mission accomplished, Your Highness." Beatrice didn't smile. She reached out and touched his arm. Her hands, delicate and glowing, rested against his blood-soaked, soot-stained sleeve. "They thought you were weak," she whispered, her voice filled with a reverence that bordered on religious awe. "They mocked your people. They called you fragile. Let them keep thinking that," Connor grunted, applying pressure to his thigh. "No," Beatrice said firmly, looking out the small viewport at the shrinking orbital station, knowing her father's political enemies had just made the greatest miscalculation in galactic history. "When we reach the coalition capital, I will tell the Senate the truth. I will tell them that humanity isn't a race of scholars and farmers." She looked back at Connor, the man who had torn apart armored giants to keep her safe. "I will tell them that Earth is a world of apex predators," she vowed softly, "and that humanity is the sword in the dark." If you enjoyed this adrenaline-fueled descent into galactic warfare and want to hear more tales of humanity proving they are the undisputed apex predators of the cosmos, you know what to do. Smash that like button to fuel the algorithm. Share this story with your fellow sci-fi junkies. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell. We drop new high-octane HFY stories every single week, and you won't want to miss what Earth does next. Hi! Clears throat. My name is Tran Trung, the owner and manager of Palace Truce. After watching the video, the assassins cornered the alien princess until her human bodyguard stopped hiding. HFY. I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? For me, the strongest feeling was admiration for quiet courage. What made this story memorable wasn't just the action, but the contrast between how Connor appeared and who he truly was. His greatest strength wasn't showing off. It was staying patient until the exact moment someone else's life depended on him. I'm curious which scene stood out to you the most. Was it the moment Connor revealed his true abilities, the escape through the station, or the princess realizing she had completely misunderstood the human standing beside her? And if you had been in her position, how long would it have taken you to trust someone who had hidden so much? One lesson I took from this story is that real character often shows itself through actions rather than appearances. In everyday life, giving people the chance to prove themselves before judging them can change the way we see the world. If this story sparked your imagination or gave you something to think about, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy HFY stories about loyalty, courage, and hidden strength, feel free to like the video or subscribe if you think it's worth your time.